Today we explore the ruins of the abandoned Packard Automotive Plant and all of the history behind the building. Constructed in 1903, the Packard Automotive Plant was a marvel of its time, spanning over 3.5 million square feet and encompassing over 40 buildings. For decades, this complex served as the heart of the Packard Motor Car Company, one of the most prestigious luxury automobile manufacturers in the world. How did this company, and this building we see here, come to fruition? To answer this, we'll need to take a look at the man responsible, James Ward Packard. James Ward, or J.W. Packard, and his brother William, founded the Packard Electric Company in 1890, through which they manufactured carbon arc lamps. In 1898, J.W. traveled to Cleveland to purchase a new automobile from the Winton Motor Carriage Company. J.W. tried to drive the car back from the factory to his home, but the car repeatedly broke down in the short span of his 50-mile journey. He ended up having to get home using a team of horses instead of his newly purchased automobile. Understandably frustrated by this, J.W. went back to Cleveland to the Winton Motor Company and told the owner, Alexander Winton, exactly what he thought about the car. After hearing the complaints, Alexander Winton replied, "If you're so smart, Mr. Packard, why don't you build a car yourself?" J.W. took this as a challenge, and he said, "You know what, Mr. Winton, I think I will." J.W. and his brother immediately began studying cars and all of their inner workings. They started to build cars inside of their electrical plant in Warren, Ohio. About 15 months later, towards the end of 1899, the first Packard car, the Model A, hit the streets. The Model A had a one-cylinder engine and made approximately 10 horsepower. The second Packard car, the Model B, was completed in May of 1900. Also in 1900, an automobile show was held in New York, and the Packard display caught a lot of attention from the public. It was here that the Packard slogan was coined. After a request for a brochure to read about the car, J.W. responded, "Tell him we don't have any sales literature. Just tell him to ask the man who owns one." J.W. knew that owners would speak highly of the Packard automobiles. "Ask the man who owns one" became a slogan associated with the company. Packard quickly outgrew its plant in Warren as orders for new models kept rolling in. One of the company's early investors suggested moving the plant to Detroit, where many of the parts needed to build cars were already being produced. In March of 1903, the company bought land along a railway in Detroit for the new location. The factory was designed by Albert Kahn, an architect who also designed Detroit skyscrapers, office buildings, mansions, and suburbs. Construction was completed in 90 days, and everything from the old location was shipped here to Detroit by train. The new plant had over 10,000 square feet of floor space, and since the day it was constructed, expansions and renovations were constantly being made. The Packard plant was the first large auto plant built in the city of Detroit. Parts suppliers and other auto manufacturers followed quickly, and by 1904, the state of Michigan produced half the cars made in the country. Workers at the Packard plant focused on making one type of car at a time. They made sure to extensively test each model and make any improvements necessary. Skilled workers built each car by hand, with each person having a specialized job to do. In the building process, the cars would move from one station to the next, with quality checks being done every step of the way. By 1908, the factory was already 6 times larger than when it was constructed, and it occupied over 14 acres of space. In 1909, the company expanded to the south side of Grand Boulevard, constructing a power plant and a 2-story service building that manufactured and stored spare parts for the cars. In 1912, Packard introduced their Model 6, which took 2 months to produce. The Packard 6 was the company's first luxury car that included a 6-cylinder engine. By 1922, the Packard plant was producing 65 cars a day and employed over 4,000 workers. Packard was outselling many other luxury car brands on the market. When the Great Depression began in 1929, fewer people wanted fancy luxury cars. To stay in business, Packard had to start making cheaper cars. The Packard 120 was the answer. Development of the 120 required changes to be made to the plant. Beginning in the early 1930s, the whole factory was redesigned. In one part of the factory, production of their signature luxury cars continued, while another side of the plant focused on producing the 120. When the 120 came out in the beginning of 1935, towards the end of the Great Depression, it was a big hit due to its price tag being less than $1,000. Even before they started producing these cars, Packard already had over 10,000 orders for it. By May, they were making a little over 6,000 cars a month. Packard went from producing 6,000 cars in 1934 to 100,000 cars in 1937. The move to the lower-cost market saved the company, bringing in more cash and more customers. In 1939, Packard changed the way they built cars in the plant, when a bridge with an assembly line inside of it was built across Grand Boulevard. This allowed car bodies to be transported to the main plant where they could then have frames attached to them. In 1941, Packard unveiled the Clipper, a car with a completely new look. People really liked it, but soon after, the United States joined World War II. Like other big car companies at the time, Packard stopped making cars and focused their efforts on producing engines for airplanes and boats to assist with the war effort. They focused particularly on the V-1650 Merlin, which powered the North American P-51 Mustang fighter plane. The Packard plant used 1 million square feet of their space to build these engines. They produced over 55,000 Merlin aircraft engines. The company did not make a lot of money during this time because the government imposed price controls to prevent excessive profits during wartime. With all their focus on war efforts, the company didn't invest much into developing new cars. So when production resumed in 1945, the design of the Clipper was outdated. The company had played a large role in the war, but the cars they were producing were essentially the same from 4 years prior. Eventually, the Packard brand had lost the prestige and luxury that its name was once associated with. Brands like Cadillac were overshadowing Packard. In 1948, they came out with the Packard 8. Packard sold 100,000 cars in 1951, but their numbers decreased dramatically over the next couple of years. The layout of the buildings also began to hurt the company because they were not ideal for assembly line work. All of the buildings are multiple stories high. Assembly lines tend to work better in large single-story plants. The company had run out of room to expand the plant any further and did not have the money to build a whole new plant in another location. Packard sales kept decreasing, and in 1956, Packard moved out of Detroit, merged with the Studebaker Corporation, and this plant we see here soon became deserted. So what happened in the following years after these buildings were deserted? Studebaker continued the Packard name for a few years, and then they ended up dropping it. Then they left the auto industry completely in 1966. Another crazy fact about these buildings, some scenes for the movie Transformers: The Last Knight were actually filmed here. They were using the Packard plant to make it look like they were in abandoned areas of Chicago. Here's some shots of it being filmed. Here's some clips of the final result in the movie. I actually came across a video of some people who explored this place right after the movie was shot, and they were able to find a lot of props from the movie.
I look out the window, and right underneath us is a crashed spaceship. There were these Transformers comics that were brand new on the inside, but made to look old on the outside.
I'll go ahead and link their video in the description. It also looks like this place got demolished shortly after I explored it. They destroyed it in early March of this year, which is 2024 if you're watching this in a different year.
Once a symbol of the choice to climb is finally coming down to the ground.
City and the community hopes it signals a new beginning for the surrounding area.
There was so much history behind these buildings, and I did my best to preserve that in this video. One thing I can't help but wonder is if any other explorers or any members of the demolition crew happen to find my business cards that I hid around these buildings. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Jesus Christ. The funny part about this Explorer is that I parked right outside of the building, and there's a good layer of snow on the ground. So anyone that drives by will clearly be able to see a trail of footprints going from my car over to the fence and then over to the building.